Welcome to the Irish NFL Show's Week 4 preview. Good evening to all of you, as always, joining us on YouTube Live. We'll preview all 16 games for this week, and there are 16 games this week. There won't be next week, of course, because it's the first bye week in Week 5. We break up our preview, as we always do, over 4 parts. Those 4 separate preview segments are also available, of course, as podcasts. Just a reminder as well that you can check out our Thursday Night Football preview podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Ben Raven, Lions beat writer, joined Brian and Andrew Morgan to discuss the NFC North clash between the Lions and the Packers, which kicks off at 1:20 a.m. on Friday morning. We're going to start our Week 4 preview with the games from the early Sunday window, and a reminder that the Sunday window starts a little bit earlier than normal this week because, of course, Falcons and Jags. The first game we're going to preview in just a second comes from Wembley. This preview is brought to you by RuPoint, demonstrating the value of global PR and comms. You can see how RuPoint can help your business at rupoint.com. So it's Sunday, 2:30 at Wembley in London. Colin will be in attendance. He's obviously shirt shopping, so he can't join us this evening. He needs to make sure he's decked out in the sartorial elegance to which we are accustomed for that game from Wembley. So it's just myself and Brian this evening, Brian. And we start with Falcons, Jags. And both sides coming off a loss in Week 3. The received wisdom is that the Jags, because they're playing essentially at home, quote unquote, in London, and they're so used to it, should have a bit of an edge here. Who needs it more, do you think?
I would think the Jags need it more. The expectation going into the season, bearing in mind where the AFC South is with the Colts and the Texans with new rookie quarterbacks, and the Titans are in a bit of a flux. I mean, we've seen that, already they're strong at home, albeit only one game, and they're quite poor so far on the road. But in terms of this game, who needs it more? The Jags need it more. Like we saw last week, the Jags lost by 20 points last week, and in fairness, we put it down to a really strong performance by the Texans. But I was reflecting on the game and the mistakes in which they made throughout the course of the game. I know we did touch on it on Tuesday, but I kind of delved into the details today, like a red zone fumble, a penalty on a 4th down conversion,
Block field goal,
missed field goal, blocked field goal, 5 missed tackles on a kickoff return by a fullback Beck, who Colin would know well from his Broncos days. I mean, they couldn't get out of their own way last week.
A beautiful statistical note, and I don't mean this in any way as body shaming, but Andrew Beck, officially the heaviest player in NFL history ever to return a kickoff for a touchdown, 255 pounds, and he managed to drop it before he picked it up. That's quite the rumble.
So when they played it on red zone, I just get away from the game. When they played that particular play on red zone, and I saw him dropping it, I went, "Oh, okay, we know what's coming here. He's going to get hit, and the ball's going to go everywhere."
He wasn't even supposed to return the kickoff, was he? Like, he's not the returner. He's there to block.
Oh, God. But look, this is the point of the game. They got too cute with themselves. That was 70-10 mid-third quarter. Bearing in mind they were down by 2 touchdowns. Sorry, they were down 17 at halftime. They eroded a 17-point deficit to 10 points. They're well in the game. It was early third quarter. They kind of got away from things. And we did kind of call it the Texans, in fairness, deserved their win. I looked at this game and I'm critical. We have been critical of the Jags defense going into the season. Over the course of the 3 weeks, they've been quite run in their run defense, and they're going to go up against a running game in Algier and Bijan, who are like on their day are really strong. Maybe Cordell Patterson might even be available. If he's back again, he's another string to the bow. But I'll side with the Jags in this one. I was a bit taken back by the ease of the Lions defense last week in terms of how they, prepared and took care of Bijan and essentially shut down the running game. And when you shut down the Falcons running game, Desmond Ridder needs that running game to work for him to be able to be in a position to, in terms of put themselves in a position that they have to focus on the run game. It gives them the option to go past, you got your Drake Londons, Kyle Pitts. But without a run game, we saw it last week, they didn't have to, they were struggling. I'm not necessarily going to say it'll be the same this week in the manner of that performance, but I think Jags will win. Jags win by 10. It's the 10th home game they've ever had in London. I go something in the region of 27-17 type of game with the Jags coming out on top.
Yeah, I'm going to pick the baton up from where you just left it there, because watching the Falcons game against the Lions last week, you saw what you're going to see from the better stocked defenses that the Falcons are going to face this year, and particularly a team like the Lions that's put in the investment on the D-line. Stack boxes, daring them to beat them with their arm, daring Ridder to go out and sling the ball, which, to be fair, Arthur Smith has let him do, which is the right thing to do. Like, they backed him, they expressed confidence in him. they set him up as best they can to go and win. Having that strong running game and having the kind of talent that they have available in the backfield, including Bijan, including Cordarrelle Patterson, as you say, if he's back, is a big help in taking some of the load off him. But they are a run-heavy team. And when the Lions found a way to shut that down, it became very difficult very, very quickly. I'm not so sure the Jags are going to put up anything quite as stout. As you say, the flip side of the Jags with all those self-inflicted wounds last week is that you expect well-coached teams, and Pedersen is a Super Bowl winning coach, and we're full of praise for what he did with them last season. You expect them to clean that sort of stuff up from week to week. It's a 2-week stand for the Jags in London. They're well used to playing there. They know how this goes. They can navigate some of the tricky elements to it that come with the disruption and with the travel and all that. I think you add that all up, and I have the Jags as one-score winners like you. I think they will emerge the right side of this. I think Falcons are one of those teams, I'm quite high on, given that they come from quite a weak division, or what we thought would be, and seems to have turned out to be a relatively weak division. I still think they're probably playoff bound on balance. They've started the season better than they've started any of the last few seasons, but I think there's a limit to what they can do, and I think we've seen the real limits to what Ritter can do in that offense. There's only so much disguising they can do. I think as the season wears on, the cuter defenses, the better coached teams, as we say, the teams that are better equipped to stop the run are going to make it very tricky for them. Again, I'm not sure the Jags are necessarily that team that's going to shut them down, but I think the Jags have enough to get over the line here.
I saw a point today that, and when I reflected, I said, yeah, it's a fair argument. People are saying the Jags would have the advantage because they're used to being in the UK and playing in London. Albeit they're not here consistently. The Falcons were here 2 years ago. They played the Jets 2 years ago in Tottenham. Albeit this game's at Wembley. Arthur Smith was the head coach. A contingent of the coaching staff are still there. The players, there's been a massive turnover in the players, but the coaching staff will understand the natures of this travel. So maybe we shouldn't focus too much or home in too much on the fact that the Jags are used to this scenario. Like the Falcons 2 years, they're only 2 years removed from being here. So I'd imagine they will quickly refer back to all the bits, do's and don'ts they did 2 years ago.
Moving on to the 6 o'clock games, Brian. Ravens-Browns, first one up there. It just seems like all the AFC North games are going to be over by about week 5 or 6. They seem to have had all of the key divisional rivalries there, all out of the way. The first half of nearly all those matchups is nearly done by now. The Browns, you called them out from the start of the season as one of the teams that you were going to be looking closely on, and you see them winning the division and heading to the playoffs. Of course, the AFC North, I don't think any team has managed to win it 3 years in a row, and 2 decades or more. So while a lot of people, myself included, were high in the Bengals, you'd actually pick the Browns to win the division. And so far, we've seen them bear out exactly what you predicted. The 3 best defensive performances of the season by any team so far. Yeah. Number 1, the Browns. Number 2, the Browns. Number 3, the Browns. They've been absolutely dominant. And they've given their offense time to settle in. Deshaun Watson has looked slightly better week on week. Still, although the stats are not too bad, the eye test is still puzzling. He doesn't look quite right. It doesn't look certainly up to what they're paying him. If Colin was here, he'd point out again, all that guaranteed money, you expect guaranteed success, and it's been far from that. They've recovered from the loss of Nick Chubb really well. They obviously drafted Kareem Hunt in there. Jerome Ford has given them a lift as well with the performances that he's had. But it's Myles Garrett on that Browns defense. They have Delpit, the new guy in the secondary there, looks amazing as well. They've just terrified teams so far this year, and it's been really impressive. They kept the Titans to under 100 yards last week, and Titans, who'd actually looked good in the first 2 weeks of the season, left to go off and think it all up again. The Ravens, on the other hand, the team that we said, yeah, Lamar is back 2 weeks ago, and then they lay an egg against the Colts, lose the game that they probably should have won. They had some bad luck as well, but that's a game you think with Gardner Minshew in that the Ravens really should have taken care of. This one's in Cleveland. I don't see any other result than the Browns coming out on top.
Okay, I'm surprised by that. But no, obviously you're buying into what I've been suggesting. But no, you've hit the nail on the head. I was looking at the points in which they've given up. They gave 3 points in the first game against the Bengals. They only gave up 12 against the Steelers. 26 points. But bear in mind, 14 of those came on turnovers by the Steelers defense. 3, 12, and 3. Best pass rush in the league so far. And as you touched on, it's a lockdown secondary. Of course, over the course of the 3 games. And the Ravens, if they were playing a better team, I'd be saying, right, this is the real true test. And it will be, because it's an NFC North clash. But the inconsistencies of the Ravens offense is a bit alarming for me, because they played it was up and down week 1 against the Texans, who are really strong against the Bengals. And bear in mind that Bengals defense that played so well on Monday with the sacks, from Hendrickson and Hubbard, like they were really like that got them over the line on Monday Night Football, and it's got the Browns over the line in certain some of these games. But again, it'd be interesting to see what offense we see from the Ravens, because last week they started again at home. It seems to be more at home than it does be on the road. They seem to be more fit to playing on the road as opposed to at home. I don't know why that is. Maybe it'll, over the course of the season, home wins will come to fruition. But no, I'm with the Browns. I think defensively, I think they'll find a way to slow Lamar down if Lamar has to get into a situation where it's a run pass option type scenario offense. I think the Browns defensively, and maybe Deshaun Watson needs a defense like this that allows him to gradually get up to speed over the course of the season. But Colin was right, and you called it yourself. The expectation is so high because of the contract. People expect immediate results. That's not going to happen, unfortunately. It's not the Deshaun Watson we saw a couple of years ago. But if he's serviceable and the defense is doing the job, ultimately, does that get them to the playoffs? I think it will, yeah. Browns for me, yeah.
Next up, 2 teams that the Browns have handled over the last couple of weeks, the Bengals at the Titans. Brian, again, it's the big Joe Burrow question. There's no getting away from it. As we were saying on Monday night against the Rams, a lot of people and of course the defense stepped up to support Burrow, and that's the sign of a championship caliber team, right? They can find ways to win when it's difficult, and they're carrying the injured Burrow so far. It's not sustainable, but you feel like however long it takes, 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks, they may just be able to do enough. I don't think their schedule is overly demanding from what I can remember off the top of my head going into the next couple of weeks. This Titans game, though, is a tricky one. Like, the Titans will really be keen to bounce back. Vrabel's the kind of coach that's backed up tough losses with big wins week in, week out during his career. They will not be happy with the way they showed up or didn't show up against the Browns last week. They really got put back in their box. That's what Vrabel expects his team to do to other teams. The Titans don't expect to be manhandled the way that they were. As we said, the Titans had less than 100 yards on offense last week. I still think, if the Bengals are going to do anything, and the expectation and the pressure they put on themselves, they've just got to win this. I fancied them to beat the Rams last week, and that turned out to be right. And I still think they're going to find a way. That's what they've been doing. They find ways to win. Again, last season they started off hit and miss. Like, they were 4-4 after 8 games last season, and then they went on the tear when things clicked. This year it's different, obviously, because of the Burrow injury, but that's the thing that's holding them back. And I think once that does get resolved, and we hope it does for the good of football, never mind the good of the Bengals, because who doesn't want to watch Joe Burrow unless your team is up against him? I think they will just about have enough to handle this one. I feel slightly nervous saying that because at times it really hasn't looked pretty for them, but they found ways to win. And like I say, that's what good teams do.
It's uncanny how early this game is in the season compared to last year. Very similar circumstances. They start off slowly. We touched on it, they were 0-2. They then beat the Titans 2016 in a hard-fought game that really could have went either way. I'd flip it to the Titans. I know you've made all the merits around. We're going to see the Bengals improve. When is Derrick Henry going to improve? Because he's only had 163 yards in 3 games. And we're so used to seeing Derrick Henry get 163 yards in one game. I've seen him go over the 200, and yet so far all he's done is 163 yards after 3 games. Is there going to be a breakout game? You would imagine there is. I'm going to lean Titans on this one. I liked them 2 weeks ago against the Chargers. It's just something about them when they play at home. And in fairness, you could argue just the Bengals have been there. They beat them in the championship game. Divisional game a couple of years ago. They beat them last season. This is actually, they've beaten 3 in a row, so they've had their number. I think it has to change. If the Bengals, they will look to slow Derrick Henry down. If they can do that, then I think, yeah, okay, fine. I can see an argument as to why the Bengals will get over the line. I see this being a low-scoring, close game. I'm not sure Burrow is ready. I think the pass rush of the Titans will give him a difficult day. I'll lean a close game. I'll go Titans.
Yeah, speaking of low-scoring, close games, we have the basement brawl up next. Broncos at Bears. Thankfully, Colin isn't here to... I
think he'd blow a gasket if he was here, wouldn't he?
To compete on which team is the worst team in football. So I guess I'll advance the case for the Bears shortly, but I'm going to leave this one in your court first. What's going to happen?
Oh God, this is a difficult one, isn't it? Really, yeah. It's. I don't think it's as bad as it may seem for both teams. I genuinely saying that, and Colin jokes, thinks I'm just saying that to be nice about my colleagues on the show. But I genuinely just think if they, for example, if the Vikings were to win on Sunday, I know I'm getting away from the point I had in the game. The Vikings win on Sunday at 1-3. People will say, okay, the Vikings can turn things around. I know the 2 teams aren't at that level, But like it's still very early in the season. Now, whoever loses, obviously, they're on a completely different track to the other. But if the Bears win, for example, and then they go to Washington on Thursday, which, like, with all due respect, they could navigate a victory there. The Bengals have the Jets the following week. They could win that game. Like, it's very early in the season to be essentially putting this game as the must-win game. I'm going to go Bears, actually. I'm going to go Bears because I've looked at the Broncos. The Broncos are the worst defense in the league right now. Now, I know people will distort that and say they gave up 70 points, but that's not even what I'm talking about. Statistically, over the course of a lot of different ranges that you look at defensive schemes and all the various different points, yards given up and stuff, they've been the worst team. They've given up 105 points in 2 games, like 35 the week prior at home to the Commanders. They're not getting anything right defensively. Their tackling was awful. There was a particular picture that I saw today where there was 3 Broncos players on the floor as I think it was Hill went by them. And the Bears, they've had their struggles and things didn't look right last week. I'm going to go the Bears to come out on the right side of it, but I'm not making the selection with any confidence here. But I just think I think the Broncos defense is in a really bad place right now, and I think Justin Fields could expose that on Sunday.
Yeah,
in the run game, not the passing game.
You're looking at the worst defense in football against the worst offense in football. Well, that is to say by Justin Fields. What concerned me about the Chiefs, and look, I take on board your point. Like, it's funny. I think I was a lot less convinced that the Bears were going to have a breakout season this season than a lot of other Bears fans were going into the year. But I'm not as convinced that it's slash and burn territory right now as other people are. I still think it is, as you say, early in the season. They have a lot of new faces to bet in, and an awful lot of things have gone wrong for the Bears. And some of those are self-inflicted wounds, right? Fields has been terrible. The coaching has been terrible. The O-line has been terrible. A lot of the new faces that have been brought in. There's a funny thing in the way that Ryan Poles has approached this. And I suppose you have to bear in mind it's his first general manager role as well. I was listening to the Under Center podcast, a Bears podcast earlier this week. And one of the points they were making is he's put value on the positions that other teams don't. Like, he's invested in the areas like linebacker. They brought in Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards. Let Roquan Smith go, of course. They paid money in that position, yet they haven't done much on the defensive line. They've no pass rush. They're getting no pressure up front. So what you have is, a well-paid, talent-rich linebacker core who can't do anything. They're constantly getting picked apart in coverage because there's no pressure up front. You have the strength of the Bears defense, such as it is, in the secondary, and they're all injured. So, like, there are challenges as well there that are not necessarily to do with coaching. What concerns me, though, about the Bears is you're seeing consistently, and Bill Barnwell at ESPN has been great in his analysis of this, receivers and tight ends run into the same spot on the field, like really poor execution. The Bears had a delay of game penalty after a kickoff, the opening possession of a kickoff after a kickoff against the Chiefs last week. That is inexcusable. The players know the play going in. There is no way the execution should be that poor. You then have things like Chase Claypool being called out for lack of effort in blocking. Now go and look at the clips on YouTube. He's not even trying. This is a guy in a contract year. So that speaks to, execution is a matter of coaching. Effort is a matter of culture. How is that being tolerated?
Who only got a trade last year? Like, essentially,
how is that being tolerated? Bears came up to the 32nd overall pick in the draft, effectively a first round pick because the Dolphins didn't have a first round pick last year. That was the first pick in the second round, but 32nd pick overall. So that's a huge level of concern. And a lot of Bears fans are calling for a house to be cleared. However, I still do think there's enough talent there. I still do think there are things that can work. And, the pressure is on them, but it's also in a funny way off them. Like, it cannot get any worse than that game against the Chiefs last week. And this could be a game where they bounce back. Having said all that, I'm picking the Broncos to win this one because I just think it's too much to turn around in too short a time. I don't think it's quite. You're
going in such a direction there. I thought, okay, this is only going one way.
Yeah, I'm showing you a level of misdirection that you never see from Luke Getsy coaching the Bears offense, by the way, where they're entirely predictable. Let's hope, to your point, if Justin Fields can get his mojo back a little bit, if he can find a way to not look completely lost, overthinking it, holding the ball for too long, taking terrible sacks, not throwing the ball quickly enough when receivers are open, and as you say, using his legs in the way that he was using them so well last year, maybe. But it's a team that's lost 13 games in a row. No other team over that span has won fewer than 3 games. The Bears haven't won a single game. Like, they're losing, unfortunately, has become a habit for them.
They need to get a consistent run game going. You saw it last week. They started off, I know it's very early in the game, it's hard to focus on the opening drive, but they had some nice runs and then quickly get away from that. And just time and time again, even when they're not down by many points, they're going with 3 throws in a row. Like, that's not Justin Fields' game. You need to get a consistent run game, get the defense off kilter, and get them on their toes, and where they're trying to judge what's coming. But when you know what's coming, it's easy. Like, it's easy for a lot of teams, especially Chiefs defense. That's when right now is playing actually quite well. But yeah, look, that's why I think I lean Bears because what I've seen in the Broncos defense, in particular, the tackling last week was terrible. And if Justin Fields is allowed to get out on the perimeter, will his tackling improve? I'm not sure it will.
Very good. Right, that's where we leave it for the first part of our Week 4 preview, brought to you by RuPoint, demonstrating the value of global PR and comms. Find out more at rupoint.com. All right, this is the second part of the Irish NFL Show's Week 4 previews. This preview show, as with all our weekly previews, is available as 4 separate podcasts covering all the games. We move on, Brian, now to Rams at Colts. I think the Colts can make it 2 in a row. They toughed one out last week with Gardner Minshew deputizing for Richardson, who may or may not be back this weekend. It's still touch and go at time of recording, but the Colts still cautiously optimistic of getting good news there. Is that going to be enough to help them over the line against the Rams?
This was one of the ones that we touched on before we started recording. You're scratching your head going through the schedule over the course of the week, trying to pick out who you think are the eventual winners. And it's a bit of a crapshoot this week, but this one in particular is very difficult. I mean, the Rams started off with a great win in week 1, played really tough against the 49ers. And I was slightly disappointed with them on Monday night. I thought that was a game that was there for them. I know, like, the score probably doesn't even do a reflection because they were down by 10 and it was a garbage time touchdown for them. Defensively, they've only had 1 turnover in the 3 games. We expect a little bit more from the Rams defense, in particular how they played week 1 against the Seattle Seahawks, who've since gone on to put up 30 odd points at home last week and another 30 in the second half against the Lions. It really is a difficult one. I think as well we've seen their offense slow down slightly. I think Cooper Kupp gradually, it's like anything, after 4 or 5 weeks, it emerges how much you miss a particular player. Cooper Kupp not being there. The rookies and the younger guys are playing well, but they need that experience to kind of navigate drives, for Stafford to get the first downs. It's not so much about the big plays at times. The most important plays for me sometimes are those third and 3s, 3rd and 4s, where you go for a slant pass and you keep the chains moving. There was a few times last Monday, but that didn't happen. I'll go Colts. I think it's a difficult one. They haven't beaten the Rams since 2009. That's in saying that they don't play them every year, but dating back to 2009. And bearing in mind the Rams played Monday night on the road. Now it's another road game. Sometimes that can take a toll on you, playing so quickly again on the road. So I'll go Colts, but I'm not comfortable with it. I could see an argument as to why both sides will win. We have this a lot this week.
Yeah,
I'll lean Colts because they're at home.
Yeah, we were saying that even before we recorded, and I struggled with this one as well, I have to say. Watching that game on Monday night, we talked about how the Bengals toughed it out and how, Joe Mixon showed up for them, Jamar Chase showed up for them when they needed the support for Burrow. The defense showed up in a big way. But all of that said, Rams were quite unlucky and also a little bit frustrating to watch at times in that game. Like, you had the scamper along the touchline by Tutu Atwell, just puts a foot out of bounds on what otherwise would have been a touchdown, and then they just lay an egg in the red zone. That happened to them a couple of times, too many times on Monday night. They left points on the board. They left opportunities behind them. Atwell had another grab, tough enough throw or tough enough reception to make it the back of the end zone, but when you feel that someone who aspires to the status that he aspires to probably should take in, they had to settle for a field goal and that. So they left behind enough points to win that game. Good and all as the Bengals were in toughing it out and in all the ways we said before. But I've seen enough from them so far this year to think they're going to be competitive in pretty much every game they play. I thought the Colts against the Ravens, it's a good result for them with their backup QB, and don't get me wrong, but I thought they got the bounce of the ball there. They Justin Tucker 61-yard field goal. His speciality just drops short. And they'd Matt Gay, on the other hand, kicks 4 50-yard plus field goals. That's not going to, or 5, was it 4 or 5? 4. That's not going to happen every week. You had bad defensive pass interference against the Colts, non-call when the Ravens were in position to win the game. Wouldn't have even gone to overtime if that had happened. So they rode their luck. I don't think the Rams are going to let them off the hook if that happens this week. Again, it's a coin toss game, but I'm going Rams on this one, so we'll end up on different sides of the equation there. We roll on now to arguably the game of the weekend, the Dolphins at Bills. geez, I don't know what your feeling is on this one, Brian, but I found this really, really difficult to call. Dolphins lost 2 tight games in Buffalo last season, including that playoff game where they'd Skylar Thompson and a quarterback where they showed up a lot better than people expected them to, and probably exposed where the Bills were at that point in the season. Bills went out and got beaten quite badly at home by the Bengals then in the divisional round. But part of me just wants to see the Dolphins keep rolling, because as much as you want to see competitive games, and we all want to see games that are difficult to call and that are close and that go to the wire, and there's also something thrilling about seeing that knife cut through butter that the Dolphins were against the Broncos. Like, obviously they're not going to have it that easy every week, but just the weapons they have, the speed they have, the variety in the game of McDaniel, the way they trust Tua to do things like that, no look shovel pass last week. It's Madden style football, and that annoys people who like to see tough defense and like to see something a little bit more traditional, but it's very, very entertaining. Now, the Bills, I think, similar to what we saw from the Patriots when the Patriots played the Dolphins, and they lost that game, but the Patriots found a way to take away the speed. They have the secondary and they have the scheme to cause the Dolphins a little bit more trouble and to really put it up to Mike McDaniel to scheme his way out of it. They managed to do enough. And we don't talk enough about the Dolphins defense, to be fair. It's all about the showboat stuff, and it's all about the speedsters they have on offense, but they can take care of business on the other side of the ball too. All of that said, I think the Bills are going to present a different problem for them. I think we're going to see the same sort of thing we saw from the Patriots, where they will take away that ability to take the top off the defense. They're not going to let that happen. They're going to make the Dolphins play in front of them. The Bills have an awful lot more punch to do some damage when they have the ball. I think it's very difficult to back up the sort of performance that the Dolphins had against the Broncos last week. To string 2 of those together, like, they're not going to put up 700 yards of offense every week. Of course they're not. And that's certainly not going to happen against Buffalo. I think this is going to be a bit of a come to earth game, and I'm tipping the Bills in this one.
The Bills are still not getting any talk around the league. We spoke in the offseason around this would suit them, the way the Jets were getting all the exposure, and after last year they'd be glad of less attention. They've had less attention after 3 weeks. The week 1 game, they lost it in a manner they really should have won the game. I felt that even after that, it was glossed over because of the way in which the Jets won and the Aaron Rodgers story. They did a number on the Raiders in week 2. People didn't really get into that because they said that's a Raiders poor team. And we spoke on Tuesday about the Broncos results. We briefly called out the fact that the Bears were well beaten by the Chiefs. We didn't really get into the fact that 37-3 in Washington was the Bills last weekend. Like, that was a really comprehensive performance. Their defense, we touched on the Browns earlier. The Bills are second in terms of the least amount of points they've given up over the course of the 3 games. Their defense is playing lights out. And I'll give an example. The Giants can't seem to find a way to beat Dak Prescott. It's just one of those things. It's the nature of the league. Josh Allen is 9-1 against the Dolphins. His only defeat was last year. I think it was around week 40. It might have been this weekend last year, and he lost by 2 points. That was the famous game where the offense coordinator was losing his mind and starts crashing everything up in the box. But he's 9-1 against them. He averages 250 yards of offense, and he averages an average of 50 yards per game. He always plays well against them. He just seems to have their number. And with you, I think it'll be a high score affair. I think it's going to be something similar to what we saw last year. I think the Bills come out on top. I think it'll be a close one. I think they'll find a way to win at the end. I think we'll still come away reflecting on a really strong Dolphins performance, but I think the Bills will just about find a way to get over the line.
Steelers-Texans, Brian, is another interesting one. We talked a couple of weeks ago about how it was incredible that the Steelers had managed to put up -4 yards of offense in the 4th quarter against the Browns, and yet still pull out the win because of the dominant performance of their defense, and TJ Watt in particular, himself and Micah Parsons and Myles Garrett, between the 3 of them, a bloodbath battle royale to try and win Defensive Player of the Year. They both look streets ahead of pretty much anyone else you want to throw in that category already. But have the Steelers turned a corner offensively? We saw something a lot more frisky from them last week. Pickett seemed to be in a little bit more of a groove, and it seemed to be coming a little bit easier for them finally. Do you see that continuing against the Texans?
I do, to a certain extent, in terms of the offense. Yeah, it was his best. It was his best game statistically and numbers wise. It was his best game since he took over as the Steelers starter last week. But I still feel that their defense is what's obviously putting them in this position to win the games. And they're going up against CJ Stroud, and CJ Stroud had a great game. Don't get me wrong, last week he played really well, week 2 against the Colts. but they got mistakes in those games. They got mistakes last week by the the Jags defense. They got mistakes by the Colts defense in week 2. Steelers haven't had a lot of mistakes. Like, with all due respect, they were comprehensively beaten week 1, but come week 2, they have 14 points off defense against the Browns. They were really good last weekend against the Raiders. It's this is a real tough ask. It'd be like this we're talking about measuring stick games. Be interested to see where CJ Stroud is on his development after this game. I think they'll hang in there, but I still think I think Steelers defensively, like Watt's got the most sacks this season, 6 sacks. I can only imagine he'll get a few more on Sunday. I think Steelers defense will put them in a position to win. I think they'll win a close game, a low scoring affair for me. Steelers to win.
Yeah, again, I went back and forth on this one. Stroud's taken care of the ball really well, unlike Garoppolo last week. Garoppolo threw 3 picks. They had him in all sorts of trouble. Steelers were all over him, all in his face, all day long. And you'd slightly fear for Stroud up against that fearsome defense that they have. It's not just TJ Watt either. They've got scary looking guys all over that defense. A classic Steelers steel curtain style affair. At the same time, they were gashed by Devontae Adams. I think Devontae finished with 172 yards.
Yeah.
Tank Dell
2 touchdowns as well.
Yeah. Tank Dell had a great weekend last weekend for the Texans, so you'd fancy the Stroud-Dell connection to come up trumps for them again, playing at home. I struggle to think that the Texans can hold them at home like you. I think the Texans have been a lot spicier than we expected them to be. D'Amico Ryans has done a really good job there. Stroud has been, like, if you looked at Stroud against Lawrence last week and you'd come down from Mars and somebody said to you, one of these guys is a rookie, the other guy is a generational talent who's been in the league 3 years, you would have said Stroud was the guy who'd been in the league 3 years and was coming on leaps and bounds. I mean, he has really looked the part. I think this is going to be a tight one. I think it's going to be a relatively low-scoring affair too. But I'd have the Steelers just about getting home, provided Pickett plays at the level he played last week, and that we don't see what we saw over the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yep.
We are on to part 3 of our preview of the Week 4 games on the Irish NFL Show. Just a reminder for all our podcast listeners to please check out all of the other 3 slates of games wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, can I please ask that you take a brief second to review or rate the show on the platform, as it really helps boost our visibility on those podcast platforms and helps others to find us so we can further expand the vibrant Irish NFL Show community. Brian, we're on to Bucks at Saints. An NFC South clash. The Saints last week obviously suffering that tough injury to Derek Carr. It's a sprained joint in his shoulder, which is not good and not something that quarterbacks find easy to shake off over the course of the season. Really impacted them against the Packers, taking nothing away from Jordan Love, who led the Packers to 18 unanswered points in the fourth quarter last week. Bucks, on the other hand, had the Baker Mayfield honeymoon experience for the first 2 weeks of the season, and back to Baker Mayfield service as normal last week. Can he get his mojo back? Is he feeling dangerous for this one, do you think, or is it Saints?
Baker Mayfield has surprised me. I've always been very critical of him. I know people say with the first 2 games there, he played really well and caught the Vikings on the hop week 2 against the Bears. I thought he played reasonably well last Monday, despite all the inconsistency of the offense. I mean, there's some great throws and great catches by Mike Evans. Probably got him out of a few holes, and I know there was a turnovers for the first time this season. By and large,
and it is the Eagles. He's not going to be playing the Eagles every week, to be fair.
No, exactly. So, again, I'd say you're going in against a defense here that, they'll be ruined the loss. We said it on Tuesday. They'll be questioning how do we find a way to give away this game, because even the fourth quarter numbers, the Packers only held the ball for 6 minutes of the fourth quarter, just those 3 particular drives, and there was some really substantial throws and yardage within those drives that eroded the field quickly enough for them to be in position to score. Alvin Kamara's coming back this week. He'll be fresh. He's been obviously suspended for off the field stuff in Vegas from last year. They need him back, because the run game, Williams has gone on IR. He was the big pickup from the Lions, and we saw Jones in week 2 score 2 touchdowns, but again, it's a rookie. You had Miller, the rookie last week, second year. They're really relying on. They've always been reliant on Alvin Kamara. They need him to get back to allow James Winston to have a comfortable game. This is a difficult one, because I can see why the Bucks can rebound, but I'm on the Saints since the start of the season. I'm on them more so because of their defense, and I think the defense at home on Sunday will do enough to put Mayfield under pressure. I think the Saints will score enough to get over the 9. I think Olave might be the one again, who has that big game and maybe a couple of touchdowns. but Saints for me.
Yeah, I'd agree with a lot of that. I think, overall, I trust the Saints defense in this one more than I trust the Bucks offense to carry them. Jameis Winston, as we know, that can be a roller coaster experience. They had a poor fourth quarter last week with him in, didn't score a single point, as you say, and Packers absolutely maximized the relatively minimal opportunities they had, got the crucial 2-point conversion, which delighted every analytics nerd in the league. This is the thing that when you're 14 points down, you should always go for 2 if you score the first touchdown, because it gives you the best winning percentage. I'll leave you to Google that one and figure out how that one works, but it is interesting, and it's clearly something that Matt LaFleur trusts in, and it worked out for the Packers last week. I don't see the Saints getting caught like that again. I don't see them getting caught at home. I think Jameis is a more than serviceable excuse me, backup quarterback. I think, again, I trust that defense. Bucks have a couple of key players out. Vita Vea, I think, picked up an injury last week. They could ill afford that. I think they're vulnerable on that side of the ball, and I think the Saints will take them at home. Commanders Eagles is our next game. Eagles, of course, who took care of business against the Bucks last week. The Eagles, for me, Brian, we talked about them at 2-0, saying relative to expectation and relative to the talent that they have, they're arguably at that point were the most underwhelming of the 2-0 teams, purely relative to expectation. I hasten to add, not like they'd looked particularly vulnerable, but you could have seen at the same time easily that they might have dropped that game against the Vikings. I thought they looked much more back to the Eagles that we expected last week, and I got to say, there's something comforting about the way that they've settled into the season, and that you get that bit of a Super Bowl hangover, and that can really take it out of teams. We talk about how it's so hard for teams to come back from losing a Super Bowl to try and win one the next year. It's something that's been done very, very rarely in the recent history of the NFL. Patriots, I think, were the last team to do it, and you have to go back another sort of 20, 30 years since the previous team did it. I think it was the Dolphins prior to that. But the Eagles have not come in tearing up tree trunks, but they've come in just doing enough. And there's no point being at your best in week 3 or week 4. You need to peak at as the season goes on. Nick Sirianni said that in his post-game press conference last week. We need to be at our best at the end of the season, not at the start of the season or at this early stage. And I think they've just about done enough, which is what you'd expect of a veteran team that knows how to climb the mountain and knows when they need to take rests and knows how they need to navigate these games. Game against the Commanders, long and the short of it is, particularly when you saw what the Bills defense did to the Commanders last week, it's abandon hope, all ye Sam Howells who enter here. For me, I think the Eagles will win this by at least 2 scores.
Yeah, Sam had 4 turnovers last week. I know it's not entirely relevant in a way because every game is different in the NFL, but it was his first real true test against the defense. And obviously we just touched on how strong the Bills defense is. But this is a strong Eagles defense. Let's be fair. This is what's helped them as well in the course of the season so far. Like last week, only giving up 11 points. I know the Vikings put up quite a few points on them as well, so we could argue that, but they did enough against the Patriots to hold the Patriots down when there was an opportunity for the Patriots to get that one over the line. And for Jalen Hurts, I'm not going to say he's just shooting the breeze and going through casually, but he's 740 yards, he's 6 touchdowns. Okay, he's had 3 interceptions. He's not setting the world alight, but it's reassuring, as you said, that they're winning these games in the manner in which they are, because it only kind of leads you to think that come November, December, when they need to really hit the ground running and put themselves in a position to get that number 1 seed, because the way things are going, I know it's very early in the season, but you look at the 49ers, for me, they're the most complete team right now, and the both of them are going to be battling each other out. They do play each other this season. Ultimately, that could be the game that kind of decides who gets the number 1 seed, and we've seen in the past, if you've the number 1 seed and you're at home, life is a lot easier for you to be in the promised land come February and playing in the Super Bowl. But yeah, I agree. For me, this game, last year the Commanders beat them. They beat them on a Monday Night Football last year when they were the team that could have ended that unbeaten run. I just can't say it this time around. I think the Commanders have had a great start. They were showing last week the level they need to get at. They won't get it this week either. I think Eagles comfortably in this one.
Vikings at Panthers, Brian. Vikings last week dropped a crazy one to the Chargers. Both teams seem to be doing their best to lose it going into the final minutes there last week. We learned that the play where the Vikings didn't clock the ball when everybody was screaming at the television for them to do that ended up being as a result of some sort of miscommunication or misfire in the headset in Kirk Cousins' helmet. He couldn't hear Kevin O'Connell, so he decided to run his own play, and that one's all on Cousins. Still doesn't explain why he doesn't spike the ball at veteran quarterback in a situation like that. I don't know what's going on there. Looks like it might be Andy Dalton again for the Panthers. Not so sure, again, at time of recording, whether Bryce Young is going to be ready to go for that one. Do you think that makes a difference if he does manage to get in?
Dalton's always great for 1 or 2 games, isn't he? We've seen it in the past. He finds a way, he comes in. The Bears had him, obviously. You saw last year, he played a number of games for the Saints. Played in London. I was quite impressed with his performance in London. They lost out in the end to a close game, but he always seems to play well for a number of games, and then gradually over the course of time, he kind of rolls back to the inconsistencies. Then I remember the Saints went on the road on a Thursday night, and he threw 2 picks for touchdowns to the Cards last year in a high scoring affair. He did well last weekend in Seattle, also, despite the loss. I'm going to go Vikings. I think Vikings have to have a clean game at some stage. They've had 9 turnovers so far. Essentially, they're losing games because they can't keep hold of the ball. You touched on it last week, Conor. If they had held on to the ball in some particular drives against the Eagles, they probably would have came out the right side of that victory. And yet they still only lost by six points. Like, they should have won last week. They just need to have a clean game. And if they get a clean game and Cousins can connect with JJ, I don't see how the Panthers can live with them. No matter who's their quarterback. But I'd actually suggest that Dalton would actually give them the better chance right now. Bryce Young has struggled so far going into the season, in the opening few games. I know he's out injured at the moment. I think he would give them their best chance. But I think Vikings get over the line this weekend and get their first victory.
Yeah, the Vikings, as you say, they're maddening at the best of times. And despite the fact that they were due a little bit of result karma after winning 11 one-score games last season. Nobody's ever done that before. Going to the playoffs with a negative points differential is just, a crazy thing to be able to do, in fairness to them. And they've lost 3 one-score games this season. But the way the NFC North has gone, and bearing in mind, of course, that the Lions play the Packers on Thursday night, so some team is going to lose that one. And Vikings are certainly not out of the picture, and 1-3 is not a disaster in the NFC North. So there's a lot at stake for them here, but there's also, a big opportunity to get a win on the board. Not the toughest trip you could have coming up on your schedule to do it against the Panthers, particularly with the question mark over the QB, as you say. I think probably on balance, maybe Dalton does give them the best chance to win at the moment, but the Vikings have played better against worse teams and not got the result. Yeah, that kind of worries you that things haven't clicked and there are those still weird misfires that happen. But I think they will do enough and they'll have enough and they'll be motivated enough to take the result here.
I remember a couple of years ago they played a game in Carolina and it ended up going to overtime and the Vikings came out on top, and it was kind of a key result at that time. But it didn't really reflect on their end of season form at that particular stage of the season. Was a huge win. This would be a huge win. As I said, the NFC is still wide open to get 1-3. They'll reflect on the games they played that they should have won. It could be the turning point, but again, Cousins has to have a clean game. And if we see the same traits as the last few games, Panthers defense will take advantage.
Raiders Chargers next up, Brian. More hot seats than a season of mastermind here. Both head coaches, you would say, feeling the warmth beneath their britches as the season goes on. Brandon Staley bailed out by his defense, a combination of his defense and that brain freeze of Kirk Cousins that we literally just talked about last week. Josh McDaniels under a similar amount of pressure, like a lot of things going wrong there. You had Devontae Adams talking at his locker after the game last week saying, last season was the season where we talked about the things we needed to do. This season is the season where we need to do them, and we're not getting them done. After 3 games, this is not where I expected to be, and that's not what you want your playmaker, arguably the best player on that team, to be saying this soon into the season. Josh McDaniels, as we know of old, is a tricky man to deal with in the locker room. That's his reputation. His winning percentage now with the Raiders even worse than it was when he was head coach of the Broncos, and he was shown the exit there. It's hard for me to see it getting any better this week against the Chargers. I think for all of their faults and for all of Brandon Staley's crazy play calling, that Chargers offense is actually going pretty well under Kellen Moore. I think that's largely been a success. We talked about Justin Herbert's outrageous game last week. 40 of 45, completing over 80% of his passes. He seemed to be able to just put the ball at will wherever he wanted. Now, got a little bit lucky with one of the touchdown passes, which essentially was a turnover that was tipped up by the defensive back and fell just nicely for Palmer in the end zone. But other than that, there's not a single throw that Justin Herbert would have wanted back. He just seems to be really feeling it right now. Playing at home, dubious advantage that is for the Chargers, given their weak support in SoFi. I think they'll have more than enough to handle the Raiders.
Is Devontae Adams trying to talk his way out of there, albeit very early? You wonder, because the reason I know it's probably a little bit off kilter in terms of the game analysis and conversation, but he went there to play with Derek Carr. That was his friend from college. Derek Carr gets released at the end of the season. The Raiders don't have the season. A lot of people had expectations that Raiders team would push on from the previous year when he made the playoffs. Last year went completely away. I mean, they were beaten by Jeff Saturday, with all due respect, like really bad results. And he says, I find the comments interesting. We saw the mistakes of last year. We didn't think we'd be making them this season. But everybody who looks in at the Raiders going into this season, including themselves, all saw a bad season coming. But yet the players seem taken back by the nature of the results. It's interesting because maybe they see a different thing than what we're seeing. Jimmy G has had the most turnovers, interceptions this season. Now, a lot of people are saying he played with a concussion for large parts of the game last weekend, and that would have, if that's one of the main reasons as to why the interceptions were shown. I'm not buying that, because he hasn't looked 100% comfortable. Even the Broncos game, he had to go out with an injury and he came back in. Okay, he got over the line. I can't see them living with the Chargers. As much as I'm not a fan of the head coach, you touched on it there. This Chargers offense has put up some really strong numbers, some strong scores. I think the Raiders would have to be hitting the 30 mark to be in a position to win this game. Can't see it. Mike Williams is obviously gone for the season. Eckler has been ruled out tonight. So there is players missing. Maybe that will have an impact. But the likes of Palmer, you touched on his touchdown there. This is the time for him to step up. He's been in the, on the periphery over the course of the last 2 years, has some good games. Maybe it's time for him to gradually show himself as a proper true wide receiver for the team. But Chargers get back to 500 on Sunday, and I'd say them putting up some good scores, yeah.
Cardinals Niners, Brian, when this schedule was drawn up, you would have looked at this game in week 4 and gone, yeah, I can ignore that one. That their Cardinals are going to get absolutely rinsed there. Their team that's going out to tank. Niners, arguably the best, strongest team in the NFL, certainly an argument for being the strongest team in the NFC, up there with the Eagles. But the way it's gone, the Cardinals have been really competitive week in, week out, and turned over the Cowboys last week. Probably the shock of the season so far, young season and all as it is. Dobbs has looked much better than expected. They look like they have a little bit of nice variety there on offense. They can hurt teams in different ways. This is now looking like a fun little game in that window.
Yeah, I have to be careful what I say about this, because last week I said they get blown out because they're coming up against a real proper defense in the Cowboys, and it didn't materialize that way. And now this week they're going to go up against arguably one of the best defenses again in the league. Yeah, it's like I was looking at Purdy's record against them last year, 15-20, 178, 3 touchdowns. Very serviceable game in a victory. That's what you kind of expect from Purdy. That's what I expect on Sunday. I think like the handicap in this game is -14. That's a big handicap to cover for the 49ers, especially if the Cardinals get off to a fast start like they have done in the past 2 games. But it's a little bit more difficult when you're on the road against arguably the best, if not the best team in the NFC. Niners to win. Will it be close? I can see the Cards trying to navigate a way to hang around for as long as possible. It reminds me kind of last Thursday night. I think the Cards will play tough. They'll be in it in the 3rd quarter. The Niners pull away and we come to him by the end of the night. Where the score probably doesn't do a true reflection on how close the game was for large parts.
Yeah, I wonder about that 14-point spread. I think that's quite disrespectful to what we've seen from the Cardinals so far this season. Are they 3-0 against the spread?
They've covered the spread in all 3 games.
Yeah, so I wouldn't bet against them going 4-0 this week there. I think they'll just about cover that. I don't see the Niners losing. I don't see them getting caught in the way the Cowboys. The Cowboys or the Niners are not the Cowboys. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think they're far too professional. I think they're far too good to let anything like that happen. So far, they've been very much as advertised. They're looking pretty healthy. Things are really humming offensively. Christian McCaffrey in particular looks absolutely unstoppable, and that's only one of 4 or 5 ways they can kill you on that side of the ball. Defense has been exactly what we expected it to be. I think, as you say, Cardinals make it interesting for as much of the game as it's possible for them. Niners probably come out with a 9 or 10-point win, but I'm not so sure they're going to cover the spread.
I think the trick of that spread at the moment is, I think the Cardinals players obviously not worrying about spreads like the likes of ourselves, but the trick has been they've got off to such a fast start scoring early that handicap essentially is doubled very quickly. And you're asking for a team.
I think they're plus 34 at halftime over the course of the 3 games. They've been in a better position than pretty much any other team in the NFL after the first half.
Yeah. So we'll see. Unless the 49ers can come out early, put a marker down, and keep it going. But no, I'd say the Cards giving them a fair crack on Sunday, but it won't be enough ultimately.
We are previewing the Sunday and Monday night football games here on the Irish NFL Show for week 4. For podcast listeners, this is part 4 of 4. You can check out the other 3 game preview segments on our other podcasts. We chop up each of the weekly predictions into 4 different segments, and you can find all of those on your podcast platform of choice each week as we record on Thursdays. In the late window, in the Sunday night window, we have the Pats at the Cowboys, Brian, in the first of those later games. Cowboys looking to bounce back after that, humiliating defeat from their perspective against the Cardinals, who turned out to be a lot more competitive than people expected them to be. The Patriots, pretty much as we expected going into the season, very strong defensively. You can always trust Belichick to get them going right. They've had a couple of nice acquisitions there. Christian Gonzalez in the draft particularly seems to be performing well for them. And the Bill O'Brien offense, while it's been maybe a little bit slower to take off than we thought, certainly has been a lot more dangerous than what we saw from the lamentable Matt Patricia experiment last year. Is that going to be is that going to be something that's going to help them against the Cowboys? Are the Cowboys in a tough spot here and they drop a second one in a row, or do you see them coming back strong in Arlington?
I'll come to the game now. I just want to comment on Christian Gonzalez because we spoke in our live show in August around how much of a player he looked and the fact that he dropped so far down in the draft. You called it a couple of weeks ago, like a baptism of fire going into the NFL. AJ Brown and Devontae Smith week 1, Tyreek Hill week 2, Garrett Wilson week 3, and this week, does it get any easier? It probably does. It's probably the easiest game, isn't it? CeeDee Lamb is not.
CeeDee Lamb is the worst receiver that Christian Gonzalez has had to mark.
It sounds terrible to say that, but it probably is the case. Like, is he a true number 1? I mean, Cowboys fans would argue he is. In this game, see, I have been impressed with the Patriots despite the win last weekend because one, Mac Jones' numbers were very distorted because of the touchdown. Obviously, it was a 50-odd yard touchdown, and people were saying, "Oh, good numbers for Mac Jones." You take that touchdown out of the equation, his numbers, decline rapidly. And I thought the Patriots gave the Jets every opportunity to win that game last weekend. There was punt after punt, towards the end of the game. Even at the end, after the safety, which made it 15-10, they still managed to get the ball back with less than a minute to go. And they still, unfortunately, because of the Zach Wilson situation, they can't find a way to navigate a drive, with the exception of one big drive in the second half. In this game, you would expect the Cowboys offense to have the drives. They've had the drives last week, they just couldn't turn it into touchdowns. At home in Jerry's World, you would expect a reaction, both offensively and defensively, because Dak's had criticism this week. We touched on Tuesday, 1 of 5 in the red zone, 2 particular drives where no scores came in. And can the Patriots methodically go down? Like, this game for me strikes me as the Patriots will have to have these long, methodical drives, keep the clock moving, keep it low scoring, and put themselves in a position come the fourth quarter. I find it very difficult to see that's the case. It strikes me as that game 2 weeks ago against the Dolphins, that the Dolphins ran out with comfortable winners in the end by double digits. Cowboys on Sunday to rebound. Patriots for me are a concern. They're not doing anything to kind of excite me. Defensively, they'll hold you in the games, but offensively, they don't have enough for me.
Yeah, I think the Patriots they're in that zone just above league average, right? They're probably a lot better defensively than most teams, but they're really limited by Mac Jones, as you said. Colin often talks about the Broncos being in orange purgatory and the Vikings being in purple purgatory. The Patriots are in their own version of that at the moment. Mac Jones's floor may have been relatively low, at least in his first season, although arguably has dropped a little bit since then. But the ceiling is very low too. Like even your best version of Mac Jones isn't really going to be enough, particularly in the AFC as it is now, to get you anywhere meaningful. And for the Cowboys, as you say, red zone performance has been awful. Dak rightly getting question marks. But the Cowboys, in terms of execution, 9 penalties for over 100 yards last week. That just can't happen. It can't be allowed to happen. And frankly, I don't think it's going to happen 2 weeks in a row. I think it's a Cowboys win at home. I don't see a way for the Patriots to navigate victory here. I don't think they're going to get blown out or anything close to it, but I just don't see how they're going to navigate their way to a victory in this one. Sunday night football, we have Chiefs at Jets. Looks like Taylor Swift will be there in the Meadowlands, cheering on Travis Kelce. We got the full discussion for anybody who listens to the New Heights podcast, to the Kelce brothers chopping it up about how Travis met Taylor. Maybe Brian should at least take the attention away from Zach Wilson. He'll certainly be open, so God love him.
I listened to another podcast today in which they said the Jets have brought in Trevor Siemian, and inevitably after 3 more weeks of this, Trevor Siemian will start. But the problem is they need a backup plan to Trevor Siemian because he can't keep fit. And what happens then? Because if Zach Wilson is removed from the team, you cannot, for the 3rd time, surely go back to Zach Wilson if Trevor Siemian is to come in and not leave it up, and they have to revert back to the original plan.
Why did they let go of Mike White? I still don't understand that. I mean, he was decent for them, or certainly a lot better than Zach Wilson was last season.
Free agent and picked up within 24 hours of free agency starting. I remember actually Colin saying to me, Mike White has been signed. Like, we wait for that. Like, we're going away from the game, but you get to free agency, the tampering period, you might as well call it the start of free agency. All these deals are done per sources within like 12 hours. And Mike White was one of the first ones to be done. And people go, oh, that's an interesting one. Because obviously the Dolphins were keen to make sure they got a really strong backup in. He comes in last week and lights it up for the 4th quarter when it was garbage time stuff. And the Jets lose him. And they got Tim Boyle, who can't really run around. There's no backup plan. It will be Trevor Siemian. Look, for this game, you saw what the Chiefs defense did last week on Justin Fields. And what I would say is, the Chiefs defense isn't probably top 5 in the league, and they still find their ways to put themselves in a position to be really good during the playoffs. And Spagnuolo always has them ready at the back end of the season. At the start of the season, they tend to start slowly. But what they do is they beat up on bad quarterbacks and bad offenses. And we saw a struggling offense last week in the Bears. And right now, the Jets offense is struggling. And this is what's going to happen on Sunday again. I think Chiefs will have a nice, easy even. Unless there's one of those weird evens like last year in week 4 where the Colts somehow with Matt Ryan beat the Chiefs because the Chiefs had so many inconsistent plays and gave the ball away. That's the only way I see it. It's down to Chiefs having the errors as opposed to the Jets beating them. But for me, Chiefs come out of this. And it's a shame in a way because we spoke about all these great games on prime time, and now the flexing is coming in soon, and the Jets are not likely will be flexed out of Sunday Night Football when so many games were put in for the Aaron Rodgers love affair. And this was another one. Obviously, they expected Aaron Rodgers to be going up against Mahomes. Not to be. Chiefs all day for me.
Yeah, 100%. You took the words right out of my mouth on both counts there. This is a game that we expected to take a very different complexion, and for Aaron Rodgers to be the star attraction rather than Taylor Swift in the stands. Unfortunately, it hasn't turned out that way. Football is the poorer for it. I do think it's funny, and you kind of touched on it there a little bit, because of what happened last season, and they've absolutely earned this to their credit, the Chiefs. The entire NFL media industrial complex gives the Chiefs an absolute pass in the way that other teams get pulled apart over the start of the season and concerns. We talked about the Eagles. We talked about other teams who don't look quite as good, the Bengals in particular, because of the Burrow injury, of course. But the Chiefs, doesn't matter what they do over the first half of the season, everybody's just going, yeah, they'll be grand, they'll be grand, they'll be grand. It's the Chiefs, and they don't get the same level of analysis. So even though they haven't been amazing, although Patrick Mahomes is playing quietly, if that's possible, out of his mind. I mean, he just seems to have challenged himself to take it to a new level. You know, we saw it when Kelce was out. We see it sometimes. We see him at his best in a losing effort, because there is nothing he won't try. There's no lengths to which he won't go to try and make something happen. And nobody has such an extravagant set of gifts to do it as he does. You know, it's kind of been, we've almost become complacent about it and taken it for granted, but it's just such an amazing thing to watch. You really have to drink it in. I mean, I had this horrible thought when I was watching them take the Bears apart. I thought, you know, I'm actually glad that Ryan Pace screwed up and didn't draft Patrick Mahomes, because the Bears would have broken Patrick Mahomes. Like, the thought of Patrick Mahomes stacking shelves in Walmart because he washed out of the NFL because he went to the Bears is just too painful to take. I'm so glad it worked out the way it worked out, even though it's not done anything for the Bears. They didn't deserve him, and they wouldn't have gotten out of him what Andy Reid has got out of him. I think we got exactly what we wanted as football fans there, and I think that's going to be plenty for the Chiefs on Sunday Night Football. I just don't see there's anything the Jets can do. We've talked about how that caliber defense that they had maybe was going to be able to slow down a couple of the offenses that they face and keep them in games, but that hasn't proven to be the case. They couldn't even get it done against the Patriots last week, and you got to say that there's very little hope of there being any improvements to the level that's going to be required to do what needs to be done against the Chiefs. I think that's a fairly obvious win for Kansas City there.
So just one more final point on that, like. If the Jets defense was with us, and you can see this week there's been a lot of frustration from the Jets defense in particular that the head coach is continuing to support Zach Wilson, because they're looking at it from the cold eye today saying, whilst the Patriots offense isn't great, we held them to 15 points and we still lose the game. It's the difficulty. They're probably thinking they can hold Mahomes to 21, 24, and realistically now, if you hold them to 22 years, you're not going to win the game. So there's probably huge frustration. That's why it's going to come to a boiling point at some stage where it's just not sustainable.
Yeah, no, entirely agree. And look, we talked about this right at the start of the season. Aaron Rodgers, a 39-year-old quarterback, like obviously nobody would have predicted in their worst nightmare that you'd have an injury as serious as the one that he suffered after 4 snaps of the season. But the likelihood of him missing at least some games was very high at the age he's at. He's the oldest player in the league. So the chance of Zach Wilson playing at least a handful of games and potentially meaningful games, depending on how the race was going, was pretty high. There was a pretty high probability there. This is a really poor job in the front office, a really poor risk mitigation job. When, as we were saying, they had Mike White. There's something different they could have done here. They decided to ride with Zach Wilson. It's like they just won't admit that he's a bust. They won't admit that they screwed up there and drafted him as high as they did. Much as though we criticized the 49ers for the draft capital they gave up for Trey Lance and for kind of bailing on him, they made the decision quickly and ruthlessly, got it out there, took the loss on it, and moved on. With Zach Wilson, it's become sunk cost fallacy for the Jets, and it's really, really costly, as you say, and I think it's caused this schism in the locker room that is going to undermine their efforts and could have much more serious repercussions if they don't address it very, very quickly. Right, moving on to the Seahawks and Giants in Monday Night Football to round it up here. This is a great-looking game, Brian. How are you feeling about your Giants going into this one?
I often say at an early stage of the season that sometimes a team wins because they really need to win and they desperately have to win, and sometimes a desperate team just finds a way to win it more, and there's no kind of rationale as to why that happens. We've seen it many a time when a team really needs to get that win, they've just somehow pull it off, and that's how I feel about this game for the Giants, because probably looking a little bit too far down the road, but the following week they're away in Miami. Right now with Miami, that's a difficult task, and the following week they're on the road in Buffalo. So you got 2 road games against the AFC East, the 2 leading contenders in the AFC East. Then obviously kind of eases slightly with the Commanders, and then the Jets, as it happens, maybe a little bit an easier game than first thought when the schedule came out. But if you go 1-3 and then you go 1-4 and then you go 1-5, the skids are on and people start getting the pressure will be on the head coach and the quarterback. Not in terms of anybody losing their job or anything, but around the expectation that people had for this team going into the season. That's why I think they'll win. They're actually getting a lot of players back. There was a lot of players missing from the 49ers game that even if they were playing against a 49ers team, would they have won? Unlikely. But they're getting 3 guys back on the offensive line. Looks like Barkley may play after all. Some of the defensive players that were struggling about 11 days to recover. Seattle, they've been quite strong the last 2 weeks, but I think the Giants navigate a victory because ultimately I think it comes down to they have to get this one. And sometimes when you really need it, you just find a way. And that for me doesn't have it probably doesn't no logic or rationale, but we've been here before. I think the Giants somehow get over the line.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I'm leaning the other way, though, I have to say. I think the Seahawks will just about do it here. They're banged up, and I have question marks about them going in there. They're one of the more injured teams in the league heading into this one, although it's looking like they may, at time of recording, get Tariq Woolen back. That would be a big boost for them. We saw the running game show up in force last week. Zach Charbonnet had the NFL Angry Run of the Week award this week, and it's one of the best ones you'll ever see. Like, that defender just gets bounced out of bounds as he goes in for the touchdown. He really was feeling it on that play. You talk about the Giants really needing to have it, and there is sometimes an animal ferocity that comes into it when that's the case. You don't see the Seahawks backing down from that challenge, though.
No.
They're of all teams, they're very much in that NFC West race. Even though, as we say, the Rams have been a bit more competitive than we'd have expected. The 49ers, the obvious front runners there. But it's arguable they don't need it any less than the Giants do if they're going to stay in that very competitive division.
Pete Carroll won't be concerned about that element.
No, not at all. Giants defense has been a big disappointment for me heading into the season. I expected a lot better from them. I thought they made a couple of good pickups, and I thought they'd be in better shape than they have been. Now, having said that, and this is the one thing that we always find it tricky to figure out as the season goes, you're making these prognostications after only seeing 2 and 3 games and just assuming the teams will stay at that level for the rest of the season. That's not the way it goes. Well-coached teams improve. They diagnose, they flex things, they move things around, they bring different players in, they get better, and they fix the roof as they go. And I do think that the Giants will do that. I do think over the course of the season we'll see a more consistent Giants defense than we have seen to date. I'm not so sure that happens right away. I think that takes time, and I think the Seahawks will win this one. I see them coming out the right side of it. Right, that is our week 4 preview. That's all the games run down now. As we said, it's the last time for a while. We're going to have 16 full games, so enjoy it while it lasts. We're on the bye week next week, which will give us obviously more time to focus in our week 5 preview this time next week. A reminder to anyone listening by podcast that we divided up into 4, so you have 3 other podcasts of the week 4 predictions coming your way wherever you get your podcasts, and we will see you very soon.